Think of something you compromised on recently. Not a big sacrifice, just something small, a decision you made because it felt sensible, practical, easier than questioning it. You didn't feel forced, you didn't feel pressured, and that's exactly why it's interesting. Because when a decision feels obvious, it usually wasn't decided in that moment. Most people don't stop there. They move on. But that moment, the one you didn't question, is where something important is happening. This video is about that moment and why power often works through choices that feel completely normal. To see this clearly, it helps to rethink what we usually mean by power. When people hear the word power, they usually imagine someone in charge, someone giving orders, someone being loud, someone being visible. That image makes sense, but it's also misleading because that kind of power is inefficient. In real life, power rarely waits for conflict. It doesn't show up to argue, it works earlier than that. By the time you're making a decision, the boundaries are already there. And because nothing feels forced, it often feels like freedom. At this point, a natural question comes up. If power isn't showing up in the moment of choice, where has it already been shaping things? One easy place to notice this is at work, not because of written rules, but because of what feels acceptable. How you dress, how carefully you speak in meetings, which ideas you share, and which ones you quietly hold back. No one explains this directly. You observe, you adjust, you learn what works. If you speak too openly, it feels risky. If you push too hard, it feels uncomfortable. If you blend in, everything feels smoother. No one forces you, and that's the point. Power isn't telling you what to do. It's shaping what feels safe to do. What makes this effective isn't that it controls behavior. It's that it doesn't have to. Power doesn't announce itself. It teaches limits silently. Once those limits are understood, everything else happens on its own. And that explains something important. None of this feels wrong. At no point does this feel unfair. It feels practical. You're not thinking about power. You're thinking about being realistic. That's when power is strongest. When behavior changes without conflict, without resistance, without anyone needing to step in. If something truly powerful has to argue for itself, it's usually already losing stability. Once you notice this at work, you start seeing it elsewhere too. The moment something feels practical, it often stops feeling optional. The same pattern shows up in everyday decisions. What kind of life feels stable? What kind of risk feels irresponsible? What dreams feel realistic? And which ones quietly fade away? You don't feel blocked. You feel sensible. You tell yourself, this is just how things work. This is the smart choice. This makes sense right now. And often it does. But that sense of logic didn't appear on its own. It was shaped over time, through repetition, expectations, and quiet signals that rarely draw attention. This is why power tends to last longer than people expect. Power doesn't endure because it's aggressive. It endures because it feels familiar. Once you start noticing this pattern, something subtle shifts. Not in how you act, but in how you see. You stop judging yourself for every compromise. You stop blaming others for every outcome. Instead, you start seeing the structure, how environments guide behavior, how certain paths are gently encouraged, while others fade without resistance. This awareness doesn't demand action. It simply brings clarity. And that clarity brings us back to where we started. That small compromise you thought about at the beginning. The one that felt sensible, practical, not worth questioning. Now it looks different. Not because it was wrong, but because you can see what shaped it. Power doesn't need to control you. It doesn't need to speak loudly. It doesn't need to explain itself. It works when things feel normal, when choices feel obvious, when compromises feel practical. And once you begin paying attention to which decisions feel obvious and why, you start to understand where power really lives. Not in loud authority, but in the quiet decisions you make every day without much thought at all. That's how power really works. If this helped you notice something you've experienced but never clearly named, that's the quiet edge.